Hi everyone, Johannes Keating here. Good to be back. Getting clear on the real and providing experiential contrast. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're interested, hang in there with me. Let's find out. This, while it's not quite an intervention, this way of working, it may or may not be original. For all I know, it's an attempt at a better mousetrap, or at least a different mousetrap, but it most certainly relies on Dr. Habib Davanou's fundamental insights and principles. At any rate, what I'll be talking about today is something that my teacher Marvin Scorman, he developed it as he was trying to adapt ISTDP proper to working with couples as well as corporate consulting. He also incorporated this way of working with individuals as it made sense. So, and I myself have incorporated this way of working into my own style, into my own personality, and I've offered my own elaborations. Calling this way of working, getting clear on the real and providing experiential contrast, but I may as well have called it an indirect form of pressure to awareness of true self and reality in relational space. In a way, it's a way of almost portraiting intimacy, you could say, disguised as mere behavioral suggestions sometimes. So don't let that fool you. There's a lot more to this than behavioral suggestions. The intervention itself is fairly simple. It involves providing contrast between status quo behavior and potential behavior stripped of anxiety and defensive reactions. This can take the form of engaging the patient in thought experiments, behavioral suggestions, role play, modeling. The portion of the intervention that involves providing contrast assumes that you've done the preliminary work of getting clear on the real. And by that I mean that you have done sufficient dynamic exploration of the patient's personal point of view, their subjectivity, their phenomenology, so as to have clarity on the dynamics at play as far as the clinical material is concerned. Getting clear on the real means that we're confident about what the dynamics are that are in operation, the nature of the symptoms, what precipitates the symptoms, their triggers, the client's emotion alert database, if you will, their psychological modules around their concerns, hopes, fears, priorities, everything that forms the substrate of their reactions, of their point of view, their subjectivity. Providing contrast essentially means that you help the client experientially see the distinction between their feelings and how they're handling their feelings or how they're responding to their feelings. This way of working is particularly appropriate for patients where the more orthodox application of ISTDP is contra-indicated. This way of working is also helpful when we need to get away from a rote and stale application of the "so how do you feel towards me, how do you feel towards me" portion of the technique. And that's especially important for clients that have a lot of knowledge of ISTDP, that they have the script down pat, if you will. But this way of working, it also lays the groundwork for more effective pressure towards feelings, as it facilitates the needed distinctions on the poles of the triangle of conflict, right? Feelings and impulses, anxiety, defense. And it ensures that the patient is clear on the actual stimulus to their feelings, on what is actually making them have feelings, what they're angry about, what they're sad about, whatever that might be. So there's no distortions of reality. Yeah, so finding ways of being creative and stepping outside the orthodoxy box, I think, is particularly important for patients who've had a lot of unlockings. Let's say you have someone and they've had 199 unlockings, but areas of their life remain conflicted and troublesome, and you're going for that 200th unlocking as if that's somehow magically going to do the trick. At that point, you may want to reconsider the methodology and find more creative, outside-the-box ways of helping the patient resolve their conflicts and gain access to their unconscious. So I'm going to get to some examples here in a minute, but let me first try to add a little more meat to the bones when it comes to the conceptual piece. Our patients need to clearly see the precise nature of whatever is mobilizing their feelings, what I'm referring to as getting clear on the real. And then the patient needs to be crystal clear on the difference between the feelings and how those feelings are handled or responded to. And that's done through what I'm calling providing an experiential point of contrast. This way of working is also about giving clients a realistic relational picture of how things really could be if they simply stayed with their feelings without adding anxiety and defense. Obtaining this realistic picture can be done through role plays and, as I think I mentioned, portraiting emotional intimacy. If you're a parent or if you work with children, the following explanation might make sense. If you're a parent listening, chances are that you have a measure of empathic imagination and you want to support your children's emotional health while setting limits on how those emotions are expressed. Fair enough? So then, how many times haven't you said things like this to your child? I can tell that you're furious with me for turning off the TV and insisting on keeping with our bedtime schedule, and that's okay that you feel that way. But in this home, we don't deal with our anger by throwing things or name calling. When I was working as a pre-kindergarten teacher, I would often say things like this to the kiddos. I know you want me to get run over by a bus right now, but you're going to have those feelings sitting here in time out, or time in, you might say. Because in this class, we don't assault each other. And so for your own good, you need to sit in this chair right here so you can learn some self-control. But it's totally fine that you want me to get run over by a bus. It's fine. But you just have to have those feelings sitting here in time in. So when it comes to both daily life and psychotherapy, the distinction between what we feel and how we deal with our feelings is just paramount. We're due for some more examples. So in couples therapy, one partner reports a negative reaction to the other when they perceive that their partner is, let's say, sexually aroused or interested in another person, but they relay their negative reaction, their anger, towards their partner by adopting a scolding, prosecutorial tone, trying to corner the partner and browbeat them into admitting their culpability, their guilt. So the first task here, right, is to get clear on the real, meaning what the client with a negative reaction, what they were seeing, thinking, feeling, what their concerns were, their point of view, and then helping them see that though their anger is reasonable based on their perception and their universe of concerns and priorities, they're dealing with their anger in a way that creates emotional distance, right? So here the therapist might say, so you were angry with him, but then you see that you deal with your anger by becoming prosecutorial. And when you do that, does that take the relationship where you want it to go or not? Does it leave you alone and frustrated instead? So then, assuming that the client can see that their way of responding to anger isn't helping matters, the therapist needs to provide a contrast, an idea of how they could deal with their anger that would increase the odds that they will feel less alone and closer to their partner instead, and not further apart. So here the therapist might say, well, what if you just said, when I saw you look at that other woman, I got the impression you were feeling lusty or desirous towards her, and that made my trust go down as far as you're concerned, and I feel really angry with you. And then you just stop and give your partner a chance to respond. So though there is a behavioral suggestion here, the intervention is far more than that. The client is experiencing a certain degree or portion of their anger in real time, and through the behavioral suggestion, the therapist is giving the client a more positive alternative to her defense of being prosecutorial. The client needs to know that there are alternatives, and this begins the process of helping the client see the difference between their anger and how they're dealing with their anger, between the anger and the anxiety and the defense, right, that creates the problems. So the mechanism that does this is the therapist providing an experiential reference point that stands in contrast to the anxiety and the defense. So this begins the process of restructuring defenses while also imparting valuable skills. Another example, this time from individual therapy, The patient is concerned about a very conflictual relationship with his father. Therapist, I'm not suggesting that you necessarily say this to your dad in reality, but could we walk through and really see together what would happen if you just stay with your feelings with your dad? Because we know what you do is that you become rude, or you blow up, or you become distant, and that's not good, based on what you've said. But if you were just honest and direct instead, could we at least see what that would look like in your imagination? You see how this sets up the stage for portraiting intimacy. Patient, sure, I'm up for that. Therapist, so if you said to your dad, it really makes me angry that I can't be myself with you and have my feelings with you without you abandoning me. I don't like that you're doing that. What would your dad say? Patient, well, he can't handle that. He would lecture me, say that I'm being rude. Therapist, but if you just said that, I don't like that you're calling me names like rude. I just don't like it. It really makes me mad that I can't have my feelings without you abandoning me. I love you and I want to have you in my life, so it makes me so mad that I can't be myself with you. I don't want to be abandoned just because I have feelings that you don't like. Well, the patient responds, well, he would lecture me at this point. Therapist, if you just said, I don't like this either. I don't like to be lectured by you. Patient, he would just say, let's take space then. Therapist, well, then you could say, I don't like that either. It's not okay for you to abandon me just because I have feelings you don't like. Patient, he would say, you're my favorite person in the world. I love you. It sounds like you're learning a lot in therapy. Therapist, well, then you could say, I am. And I feel like I can't be myself and healthy and still have a relationship with you. I feel like in order to have a relationship, I have to cripple myself. And I don't want that. And I don't want to sell you short. And I don't want to sell us short. I want to be able to say that I'm mad at you, and for you to understand, not to abandon me. Another sort of angle at this, the therapist. You could start off by saying, Dad, I've been mad at you, but handled it poorly. And the first thing I'd like to do is apologize for handling my anger poorly. Not for how I felt, but for how I handled it. But I'm working on being closer to you and my feelings without being mean. It's not your fault that I've been mean. I'm going to try to just explain my anger to you rather than being mean, because I want you to understand how I feel, and then I want to hear how you feel. The patient here might say, I don't know what my dad would say. Therapist, you of anyone on the planet would know what your dad would say. But you see how a part of you is throwing up roadblocks by being distant and then blaming him. And I don't think that being a victim of him is going to help you. Do you really want to go through life being a victim? Or do you want to take responsibility for your life and deal with it in a more direct manner? Which do you think would be more satisfying for you? So the functions of this intervention, the intervention can correct distortions of reality when the other has been distorted, such as when splitting and projections are in operation. It's also to help the patient not be so terrified of his feelings, normalize them, so that he can see that what he wants is ordinary and reasonable. So we can see if there actually is room for a more satisfying relationship with the father. It may flesh out that he has been demonizing his dad, and his dad actually could handle the intimacy. There's a restructuring quality to this, in that the patient will get a clear sense of what it would feel like to be emotionally intimate with himself and his father. It's likely to make it clear to him that emotional intimacy isn't as bad as he thought it was. It begins the process, right, of undoing being a victim to his dad and seeing his own role in the distance and the conflict in the relationship. If he's resistant to doing the exercise, for example, help him see that he's avoiding an intimate relationship with his dad, even in his own mind, right? So therefore, he's not just a victim to his distant father, but he has a role, right? He can't just blame his father. The therapist might say, so you're blaming your dad for the lack of intimacy, but look at who's also preventing the intimacy. Even in here now, you're throwing up these roadblocks and distancing. So he may see that he has never really just told his father how he feels without being mean or indirect about it. And this also mitigates against defiance, as he would see that being intimate with him, even in fantasy, is actually more satisfying than remaining defiant. So, in summary, skills are being taught through this way of working. And at first glance, it might look like the therapist is merely engaging in a cognitive kind of behavioral modification work, but the function of the teaching of the skills, which is often in the form of therapist role playing and modeling emotional intimacy through the commentary, it's not just about helping the client or the couple acquire new skills, though it's also that, right? It also includes the couple or the client. They're able to see in concrete terms what you're shooting for in terms of emotional intimacy, in terms of an alternative to their status quo, the anxiety and the defense, right? So, this is where the therapist says things like, here's what interactions between the two of you can look like if our therapy is successful. You would handle your feelings like this instead of that, and you would handle your feelings like that instead of this. This obviously strengthens the conscious therapeutic alliance. It really restructures how the couple communicate with each other. And in the case of individual therapy, it can help the client get a realistic picture of the other person, of their own role in the distancing or the conflict in the relational issue. It can help undo defiance. And most fundamentally, it can facilitate this experiential insight into this distinction between our feelings and how our feelings are handled or responded to.